Okay, it's good that I've got the hecklers already. Okay, in order to do this, I don't have any pyrotechnics, so I need your help. Okay, I want everybody to close their eyes for a second. Okay, I want to imagine you're sitting on a ridge. Okay, and in front of you, you can see golden sand. You can see speckles of green dates. And every now and again, you can hear the sound of a truck that's traveling in the distance. Shh. Okay. I want you now to imagine with that view that this is where you live. This is where you've grown your children and maybe even your grandchildren. And this is a place where only you control what the future will be. Okay, you can open your eyes again. You've just arrived in the Southern Arava, a place where we have 1.25 millimeters of rain a year, where we grow dates against all the odds, where we have water that comes from the ground but is so saline that it makes it almost impossible to grow anything, and where we're dependent on a tourist city in order to make sure that we have enough water, because there we can recycle the water they've used in the hotels. And then I want you to imagine that the price of dates has just plunged from $60 a kilo to 60 shekels a kilo. And my communities are in danger of no longer being sustainable. I have a challenge that's insurmountable, no? How am I going to solve that solution? That if as a farmer, I'm making so little money because my water's so expensive, how am I going to have my children remain where I decided to create a community? How am I going to manage to have a situation where I can have my grandchildren live with me? And then Al Gore didn't become the next president, and instead decided to dedicate himself to climate mitigation. And yet we're still in the Arava. And what's Al Gore got to do with anything? And there was a guy called Udi Gat. Udi Gat was the past mayor of the region, and turned around one day and said, you know what? If the sun is going to punish us every day, we might as well make it work for us. And turned around to a group of young people who were at the time working in the Environmental Protection Department, and said, we're going to create the Silicon Valley of renewable energy. First lesson. A challenge is only a challenge until it becomes an opportunity. That same challenge of that sun that beats down on you every day, of large open spaces of sand that make it almost impossible to farm, all of a sudden became our advantage. And we decided that we were going to be the place that would be where we'd build the first solar field in Israel. There was no legislation. Nobody knew how to do it. But that's what we decided to do. We started small. We did a conference. 20 people sitting in a room. That was our conference, all right? Most people call that kind of a meeting. But this was a conference. And we were really lucky, because at that conference, another opportunity came. There was a guy called Yossi Abramovich there. A guy that we now call Captain Sunshine, okay? Who was actually just finished a major exit from high tech. And he was listening to what we were saying, and said, don't we have a solar field? And so we started working day and night to create legislation. The first time in Israel that you see social policy, instead of being created in Tel Aviv in Jerusalem, it was being created in the final frontier of Israel. Okay, there are no frontiers of Israel except for in the Arava today. Everywhere else has really been developed. And we hit a snag because there was no such thing as zoning for solar fields. So what did we do? Under every panel, we put a box. Now that box didn't have anything in it, but the moment I have a roof and a box, it's called a storage unit. Again, when a challenge becomes an opportunity. And the first solar field was built. It was the most expensive solar field ever built, okay? But it changed the way that the law was working, and we, the people, the only people who had control of our future, were creating the policy. Today, we created 110% of our energy needs, all the way from the city of Eilat to the Dead Sea. Okay? The next place that has that sort of renewable energy production is Spain, which is around about 30%. Okay? And was government subsidized. We work with grid parity. The trouble is that it's passive income. And do you remember that I grow my children? And I want my children to remain. Okay, just over here, there's a guy called Hanan Ginat. He's the mayor of the region. And you need to give him a round of applause. All right? Now, why do you need to give him a round of applause? Because his son has just moved back to his kibbutz to start his life. And we were there to turn around and say, how do we make that life that isn't just for us, but is for generations to come? But this is only the first stage, because in the first stages, what happens is each kibbutz or each community turns around and said, we'll build a solar panel, or we'll build a solar field, which didn't really create the big change that we wanted, because farming was still something that helped support the whole region, and only rich communities can build a solar field. And so the next stage was to turn around and say, how do we start creating jobs from where we're creating energy? And that's where we're at the moment. The second lesson, okay? The second lesson is to turn around and say, how do I leverage, or what is it that can take a really successful project and turn it into something different? And how did we do it? Agrivoltaics. Has anybody ever heard of agrivoltaics? Agrivoltaics is when you turn around and you use dual use of land. Why dual use of land? We turned around and said we want to put solar panels above our crops, and we're going to grow crops underneath. How would you do that? How would these plants get sun? All right? In the end, they go to the sun, no? And here's the thing. Changing a challenge into an opportunity. We have too much sun. Our plants can't grow. Okay? What we have to have is really hardy things. At the moment, we're just about to change the way that we look at the world. Why? Because now we no longer have to just be dependent on dates. Because by being able to play with shade, by being able to prevent water from disappearing, okay, we're able to look at different things. Okay? But what this is really about is turning around and saying, how can we turn around and say that our communities can start deciding how they're going to use these new plants in order to bring back their children? And that sounds weird, no? How do plants bring back children? And so now we're going to go on to the next thing, which is to turn around and say, we learned something from this process. And last summer, it was 40 degrees in London. Okay, or 120 degrees in London in the summer. Okay? What we have been living with for the last 50 years is about to be the challenge of everybody around the globe. Okay? And so what we're doing now is we're starting to share our knowledge. And how are we doing that? we brought all of our research institutions together and said, take your skills, bring them together, okay? And instead of being 5 researchers here and 10 researchers there, we're now going to be 100 researchers who are working together to find solutions globally that we can share. 4th lesson. Once you can share your knowledge, they will come. And we've started having students who come from the Technion and from other engineering businesses to understand how you integrate renewable energy within your architecture, within your country planning. And we've started having that idea that we no longer have to look at our own fields. That what we can do is turn around and say, let's work together. 12 communities, 12 kibbutzim, 12 synagogues, all working together. Where does that happen in the world? Okay? But 1 minute. So what I'm going to leave you with, which is the last lesson. The last lesson is to turn around and say that what you think you're starting is never where you're going to end up. But what you always need to turn around and say is, how do I share what I've created? If I share what I've created, I will be more than the sum of what I've started. Thank you very much.